So I'm going to start talking about the lab assignment number 7, which was assigned before spring break, but I'm going to, have you complete this by the end of this week, and we will have a lab number 8, which is now posted as of our second meeting of week 9. So as I discussed before the spring break, I went through this once, and I'm going to go through it again. So basically, you're going to have a multi-scene uh, presentation with a cartoon story, and you could read through all of this, but essentially you're going to have to create a storyboard narrative using a series of pictures and or text. You can sketch it on paper. Make sure that you have a timeline as far as how you want it to play out. There's going to be 3 scenes initially, and then a 4th scene, which is just the credits scene. So the first scene, you're going to create original assets or download assets from Google Images and kind of set the stage for some kind of a cartoon situation that you are familiar with. Um, I'm going to use the classic Charlie Brown with Lucy pulling the football away from him as he runs and falls flat on his back. So basically, this is just a run through on something like that. I'll probably make a few different short videos to show you the techniques for each of the parts of this lab. So make sure that you read through all of this, but we're going to have multiple scenes, so this is something new, and we're going to be using a script to jump to the next scene from the current scene and back to the previous scene. So there's a number of steps that we have to perform, and from here on out, we're going to have very similar kind of situation with multiple scenes. So you're going to have to create buttons and use the script for going to next pressed and previous pressed. So there's a script here. There's also a script on the lab assignment tab in Blackboard where you go to sample scripts and then just select the scene controller script. This updated scene controller script 2 actually has a go-to scene in it. We don't necessarily need the go-to scene today, but you could use the other two, which is next pressed and previous pressed. And all they do is they take the current scene, which is in the scenes in build, and adds 1 to its position so that when you hit next, it goes to the next scene in build. So you got to make sure that all those scenes are in the build. And then there's a previous press, which allows you to back up from the current scene. Remember, they're in a sequence, 0 through whatever. So you got to make sure that they're all in there. The go-to scene we could use is a little more advanced because it requires that you specify the scene name that you want to go to. So if you have navigation that says start with scene 1, and then you have 4 other scenes that you jump to, you don't have to go sequentially. You can go directly to each one of those scenes. So, back in the editor, I'm going to just show you that I have a scene partially built with Lucy and Charlie Brown, and we want to put a speech bubble to have Charlie just greet Lucy, and then Lucy will respond. And then I have just a static image of Snoopy by his doghouse, but then I'm going to add him like flying around maybe in the next scene. But basically, we have this park scene. So park 1, I'm just going to adjust it to my my aspect ratio here, and so we're going to create another scene eventually, but just make sure that in game you've got the 16:9 ratio, and then also in build settings you go to player settings and make sure that when you go to supported aspect ratio that 16:9 is the only one selected. And then in this particular situation, I didn't rename my sample scene, so I wanna do that right now. See how it's got it season build sample scene. So I'm gonna go in here and then just rename that to scene 1 for lack of a better naming. But essentially, you know, scene 1 is probably a better name than just sample scene. So what I'll do, I guess for some reason I have to change that park background again for some reason, but it should stick according to the aspect ratio that you've selected. And just make sure that you save it often, save project, save. And now if we look at player settings, by the way, build settings, player settings, you'll see in build settings, scene 1, okay? So we want eventually to show this as scene 1, scene 2, scene 3, scene 4, and they have a sequence number 0 through 4 or 0 through 3, which is used by that script. Remember it says +1 or -1. So now what we want to do is have a animation on this speech bubble. So right now that speech bubble is not animated, so I'm going to select it and then go to animation, and then I'm going to create animation, and I'm just going to call it Charlie Speaks. And then when I go to the timeline, let's say we want him to speak starting 1 second in and have that show up for 2 seconds. So it's going to be from 1 to 3 seconds. So what you have to do is you have to add a property. So you hit this little, the button here, add property, and then under sprite renderer, there's an enabled button. You hit plus. So now we see the 2 keyframes got created at 0 and 1. So what we want to do is just, we want to move the one that's at 1 out to 3, okay? And then this one, we want to move it out to 1. So what we want is initially, we don't want the speech bubble to show. So you see at 0, there's no keyframe. But when I click on the checkbox, it creates a keyframe. And then when I move this capo to here, you see that the speech bubble shows up with the checkbox enabled. And then at the very end, at the end one, we want to disable that. So uncheck that. And then when we go to the project, of course, if we run this, it's going to not show the speech bubble. Well, it will show it, but then it disappears. So actually, that's what we want. We want it to disappear after 3 seconds. So, we don't need to take, well, actually we do need to take the loop off. So on my version of Unity, it's got this larger button for play, and we need to uncheck the, we need to uncheck the loop time on there. Okay, so that will just conclude the first video, which is just to show Charlie Brown greeting Lucy, and then she'll greet him back. So we're just going to, I'm going to make another video after this.